All right, so we're diving into the world of tarot today,
Yeah.
but not in the way you might think. We're not focusing on fortune telling or anything like that. But, a lot of you have expressed interest in learning more about tarot. We thought it would be really interesting to do a deep dive into the ethical side of it, things that maybe even some seasoned tarot enthusiasts haven't really considered.
It's interesting. People always immediately jump to fortune telling when they think about tarot. But responsible readers don't really use the cards to predict the future. It's more like using them as a tool for introspection, kind of like therapy in a way.
Oh, that's a really good way to put it.
Hmm.
So instead of like looking into a crystal ball,
Mm.
you're using the cards as more of a mirror to understand yourself better.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really important foundation for understanding all of the ethical stuff. One of the sources we looked at talked about using tarot for career guidance. So, like, if you pull the chariot card, for example, which is often associated with willpower and determination, it's not necessarily saying you're destined to become a CEO or anything like that, but it might suggest you have the drive to take on some challenging new project.
Ah, so it's more about tapping into your potential than figuring out some predetermined path.
Exactly. And that's why informed consent is so, so important. Before a reading even begins, clients need to know what tarot can and can't do.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What does that look like in practice? Like, how do you ensure informed consent?
It's all about being transparent about the limitations of tarot.
Mm.
A reader might say something like, the cards can offer insights and possibilities, but they can't guarantee outcomes.
So no guarantees you're going to win the lottery just because you pulled the Wheel of Fortune.
Right, exactly. Think of it kind of like reading a movie review. It might give you some insights into whether you'll like the film, but it doesn't dictate whether you'll actually enjoy it or not.
I like that analogy. It definitely helps manage expectations. And speaking of things that need to be carefully managed, our sources also talk a lot about confidentiality.
Oh, absolutely. That's like one of the most crucial aspects of ethical tarot reading. People often reveal very personal things during a reading, stuff they might only share with a therapist.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like
Yeah.
the reader becomes kind of a temporary confidant.
Exactly. And that means they have an ethical obligation to protect that information. If that confidentiality is broken, it can cause a lot of emotional distress and really damage the trust between the reader and the client.
It sounds like ethical tarot is really built on respect and transparency
Hmm.
and having really clear boundaries.
You got it. But unfortunately, there are definitely times when those lines get blurred, and that's when things can start to get unethical.
Let's talk about those red flags then. What are some things people should watch out for?
One of the big ones is when tarot is used with someone who's in a vulnerable state, like if they're going through some mental health challenges or dealing with grief or trauma.
That makes sense. In those situations, people are often kind of desperate for answers and might turn to anything that seems to offer some hope.
Yeah.
But why would tarot be potentially harmful in those situations?
Well, someone in that kind of fragile state might misinterpret the cards or like latch on to certain meanings that reinforce their negative feelings.
Can you give an example of how that might play out?
Sure, like imagine someone with anxiety pulls the Tower card, which is often about like upheaval and sudden change. They might just fixate on the negative aspects of that, and it could end up amplifying their fear instead of seeing it as like this potential for transformation and growth.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I see what you mean. So, what should a reader do if they sense a client is in that kind of vulnerable state?
The ethical thing to do is to recommend they seek help from a licensed professional. They might say something like, hey, it sounds like you're going through a lot right now. I'm not really qualified to give you the support you need, but I can help you find some resources for mental health professionals.
Wow, that takes a lot of integrity to like put the client's well being above the potential for a reading.
It's all about recognizing the limits of tarot and prioritizing that person's safety and well being. But unfortunately, not every reader operates with that level of ethical awareness. And that can lead to another big concern, which is exploitation.
Exploitation. That sounds pretty serious.
It is. We're talking about situations where someone's desperation, especially around things like love, money, or health, is being taken advantage of.
So, basically, preying on people's vulnerabilities.
Exactly. There have been cases where unethical readers will charge exorbitant fees or promise to fix problems or even claim to remove curses, all while knowing they can't actually deliver on any of that.
I can imagine that kind of manipulation can be incredibly damaging.
It really is. It often preys on that psychological need for hope, that belief that someone somehow can just magically make everything better.
So, how can people who are seeking readings, how can they kind of distinguish between an ethical reader
Hmm.
and someone who might be trying to exploit them?
Honesty is a big one. Ethical readers will be upfront about what tarot can and cannot do. They won't promise guaranteed outcomes or make claims that sound too good to be true. Instead, they'll focus on empowering the client, helping them understand their own strengths and make informed decisions for themselves.
So it really comes down to being an informed consumer, right?
Yeah.
Do your research, ask the right questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And trust your gut. If something feels off, don't be afraid to walk away.
That's really good advice. So we've talked about mental health and exploitation. Are there any other areas where ethical considerations come up with tarot?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Health predictions are a big one. That's where things can get especially tricky.
Yeah, I mean, tarot cards aren't exactly a replacement for a medical degree. Seems like there's a lot of room for things to go wrong there.
For sure. Any ethical reader would never, ever make predictions about health outcomes or advise against seeking medical treatment. It's just incredibly irresponsible and could have some really serious consequences.
I can only imagine,
Hmm?
like, someone might delay getting treatment for a serious condition because a reading told them everything was going to be fine.
Exactly. You always have to remember that tarot is a tool for self-reflection and exploration, not a substitute for qualified healthcare professionals. So if you have any concerns about your health, always, always consult a doctor.
It's a good reminder that every tool has its limitations.
Yeah.
And speaking of tools, we've talked a lot about the ethical pitfalls of tarot. But what about its potential benefits? Like, when can tarot readings be a positive force in someone's life?
Well, one of the most powerful and appropriate uses of tarot is for personal growth and self-reflection.
So this goes back to that idea of the cards as a mirror,
Right.
helping us see ourselves more clearly.
Exactly. And, specific cards can really enhance that process. Like, for example, the Hermit card, which symbolizes introspection and soul searching, might encourage someone to ask themselves, what do I truly need to feel fulfilled? It's not giving you a direct answer, but it's prompting you to really delve deeper into your own inner world.
I never thought about it that way. So it's less about fortune telling and more about using the cards as a framework for self-discovery.
Yeah, precisely. It's about understanding your own narrative, your strengths and challenges, and then using that awareness to make more conscious choices in your life.
That's so empowering. It's like taking ownership of your journey
Yeah,
instead of feeling like you're just at the mercy of fate.
exactly. And, tarot can even be used for creative inspiration.
Wait, really? I've never heard of that before. Tell me more.
Yeah, there are actually some really cool examples of artists, writers, even musicians who use tarot cards to kind of spark ideas and fuel their creative process.
So instead of like looking for literal answers in the cards, they're using them to tap into their imagination.
Exactly, like a writer who's struggling with writer's block might pull the star card, which is often associated with hope and renewal. And that imagery might inspire them to write a scene about a character, overcoming a difficult challenge, or finding a fresh perspective.
I love that. It's like using the cards as prompts for creative exploration.
It is. And of course, we can't forget about the lighter side of tarot, using it just for fun and entertainment.
Oh yeah, like those fun tarot readings you might see at a party or a festival.
Exactly, as long as everyone understands that it's just for fun and not meant to be taken as serious life advice. There's nothing wrong with a little lighthearted tarot entertainment.
It's all about being clear about the intentions
Mm,
and making sure everyone's comfortable, right?
absolutely. Transparency and consent are always key, even when we're talking about something as seemingly simple as a fun tarot reading at a party.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, the do's and don'ts, the good, the bad, the playful side of tarot. What does all of this mean for someone who's either interested in getting a reading or maybe considering becoming a reader themselves?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is the importance of setting clear boundaries and expectations.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for readers, it means being honest about what tarot can and cannot offer, not making promises they can't keep, not overstepping boundaries, and not presenting themselves as something they're not.
And what about for someone who's seeking a reading?
For them, it's about being an informed consumer. Do your research, ask questions about the reader's approach, and what you can realistically expect from a session. Don't be afraid to walk away if something doesn't feel right.
So it's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
Both the reader and the client have a responsibility to create a safe and ethical experience.
Exactly. And I can't stress enough how important it is to create a non-judgmental and inclusive space for both the reader and the client.
Why is that so important?
Because tarot often delves into very personal and sometimes sensitive topics, and people need to feel comfortable sharing their vulnerabilities
Right.
without fear of being judged or shamed.
It's about creating that sense of trust and safety
Mm.
so that everyone feels respected and heard.
Exactly. And finally, I think it's important to remember that the future is not fixed. Ethical readers will avoid making definitive predictions, especially about major life events.
So instead of saying, you will definitely get this job, it's more about exploring the energies surrounding the situation and offering potential pathways or possibilities.
Right. It's about empowering the client to make their own choices and create their own destiny.
That's a much healthier and more empowering approach for sure.
Absolutely. Tarot can be a really powerful tool for self-discovery, but it's essential to use it responsibly and ethically.
That's such an important point. Tarot shouldn't be about dictating outcomes, but about helping people understand themselves
Yeah.
and navigate their lives with more awareness and intention.
Well said.
It's amazing how much we've uncovered about ethical tarot. It's definitely more complex than I initially thought.
I know, right? There's a lot to consider, both for readers and those seeking readings. It's about being informed, respectful, and using this tool in a way that truly empowers people.
It's definitely been a real eye-opener for me, and for anyone listening who's intrigued by tarot. I think the biggest takeaway is to do your research, ask questions, and find a reader who really aligns with your values and intentions.
Absolutely. And remember, tarot is just one tool for self-discovery. If it resonates with you, fantastic. But if not, there are so many other paths to explore.
So true. To wrap things up, I'd love to hear from you. If you were to get a tarot reading purely for personal growth, what one question would you ask the cards? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of ethical tarot. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and until next time, may your journey be filled with insight and self-discovery.